kind of see it as my job. It's like translation. What's your body saying? How many of those needs can we address? Sometimes you can't address all of them, and there needs to be a deep acceptance and love. We're not things to be fixed. We're people to be supported.
Welcome to Neuro Revolution. The world was not designed for us, so we are creating a new one. Hear the stories of neurodivergent entrepreneurs, creatives, and changemakers. The rebel minds changing the world.
Welcome back to Neuro Revolution with Jennilee, your host, or welcome for the first time if this is your first time coming here. Today I am talking with Kezia Hall, who is a holistic nutritionist and coach for women who are fed up with feeling bloated and tired, among a bunch of other things, I'm sure. We actually met at a retreat in Glastonbury, England, over solstice weekend. It was really powerful. And at the end of that, we started talking about our shared experience of being neurodivergent individuals, and then also really diving into a bit of Kezia's expertise around nutrition and digestion. And so I wanted her to come on this podcast. And so I'm really excited for you to be here. Welcome.
Thank you. I am very excited for this conversation, and I loved spending time with you in Glastonbury. It was so fun.
Well, maybe to start out, would you be willing to touch on a bit about your journey with neurodivergence and your self-understanding?
Yes, I would say I'm very much still in my journey. I imagine everybody comes to this realization of neurodivergency in adulthood in various different ways. And so, I still kind of feel like I'm in the baby era phase of realizing, or maybe said another way of accepting and understanding what that means. Because it's like a little revelation where you're like, this is how my brain works. And there's a structure for this. And some of the things that I've struggled with, I can understand the mechanisms of, which is in one sense such a relief to me, because I don't feel like, I think for me anyway, I'll speak up just for myself. It feels like a lot of the things I just felt like I failed at constantly, when then actually understanding, this is the way that my brain is set up. That has overall been such a relief. But it has been a bit of a weird and winding journey to get to the point of being like, okay, I'm neurodivergent. And I've not had an official diagnosis, but I would put myself in that autistic and ADHD box. I think that's probably where I resonate and fit best. And for me, it really started with, I've always struggled with my health, actually, gut health, and I'm sure we'll go into that, but also my mental health. And then it was actually probably only about nearly 7 years ago, I had a baby, I had my son, and that was really a catalyst for a whole shift, awakening, whatever you want to call it. There'd be lots of labels for that. And that actually, at that point, I started to remember a lot of different traumatic events that had happened in my childhood that my brain had literally just decided to sort of remove from my conscious awareness. It's obviously been in me the whole time. And so actually my journey to neurodivergence first came through understanding and coming to terms with the fact that I have complex PTSD. And actually what I thought was my life and my childhood and my experience, which in lots of ways was very blessed and had lots of privileges to it, was actually a completely different experience. And my brain for the last 30 plus years has been in this, living with this kind of complex PTSD. And so that actually was where I spent a couple of years just living with those flashbacks and nightmares and trying to figure out what's real, what's not real, or whilst trying to look after my new babies. It was loads of fun, as you can imagine.
Yeah, very intense.
Yeah, it was very intense. That was the word for it. And so through doing that and through realizing, okay, this happened to me, this is the truth, this is blah, 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 all this kind of stuff, I did various trauma therapies and psychotherapy and different things like EMDR, really dove into being quite a data research oriented person, really looking into, okay, what does this mean for my brain? What does that mean? How's my brain working? How did it develop? What does that mean? All these kinds of things. And it was actually only really through this trauma therapy I did for about a year, which is called the comprehensive resource method. which basically brings together lots of things like EMDR, psychotherapy, a little bit of shamanic practice, like a whole bunch of different stuff to really help with dealing with specific traumas. Anyway, it was through working with that therapist for probably a year and a half, and really finding that helpful, that she actually brought up the conversation of, so this might be helpful for this next phase of neurodivergency wasn't her specialism, but just from working closely together, she was like, this might be a helpful thing for you to explore or think about and see how that fits with you. And at the same time to that, I'd also been reading a memoir about an adult woman who had realized she had autism in her kind of late 30s and 40s. And I was reading this memoir about this big journey she went on, basically, of realizing, oh my goodness, I'm autistic. I didn't know this for years. And I was just reading this book being like, yeah, no, that's just normal life. Like, hello, like kind of like enjoying the book, but also a bit like, I don't see what the big deal is. Just like, yeah. And I remember speaking to a friend who is more neurotypical, I suppose. And she was like, oh, okay. And I was talking through this book, and she was like, and I was saying how much it resonated with me, and also, oh, but I don't really quite get what she's talking about. And that was a really helpful conversation where I started to be like, oh, okay. And then I had another friend challenge me. During this time, I had my son, and then I got pregnant with twins. And so then I had twins as well. And during this time, I remember talking to a friend and just being like, oh, well, I just assume like at least one of my kids will have ADHD or autism or both. Like, that's just so obvious to me. And my friend was like, really? Why is that obvious to you? And I was like, well, I mean, I don't have a problem with it. I don't feel like that would be a bad thing. I don't have a problem with it. Knowing what I know about my genetics, how my biochemistry works, how my gut works, I'm just like, I feel like that would maybe be an obvious outcome. And she was like, oh, I've never thought that about my children. I'm like, oh, interesting. Why? And then I was like, why do I just, because I assume at some point there's 3 of them, at least one of them will get diagnosed. And I'm like, cool, that just feels inevitable to me. But when I really sat with that, I was like, oh, okay. I just pull at that a little bit. I'm like, oh, it's because actually that feels true for me. So that's a very long-winded way of how I kind of got into it. And I'm still kind of learning a little bit of what that looks like for me. And I come up against the edges of that of, if I tell people I have ADHD, they're like, obviously. For anyone who's spent time with me for a long period of time, I feel like people understand that. But when I tell people, oh no, I have autism as well, there's a lot, I'm more selective at who I say that to. I wouldn't say I would announce that. I'm at the stage where I would say that not constantly or publicly all the time to people, because I feel like I have to constantly explain that. And people are often telling me inadvertently, oh, no, you're not. Don't be ridiculous kind of vibe. And so I'm still navigating that in terms of dealing with other people.
Yeah, because there's more of like a stigma and misunderstanding about autism. There's a lot more, I think, sort of public understanding, or at least somewhat, not like to the full extent of what ADHD is, but so yeah. And I think, a lot of autistic folks, especially when we discover that later in life, have a similar experience where people are like, no. Or it's their family who may also be undiscovered neurodivergent folks.
Well,
but how interesting, though, for you that it was sort of it's like it was sort of there in your mind and your conscious, where you're like, oh yeah, this would make sense here, this makes sense there, this memoir just sounds really normal to me. and then it sort of like bubbles up, you're like, wait.
Oh. So true. It took me a while to catch on, you could say.
You know what? I haven't heard you say, and I think that's really beautiful, but you'll have to tell me if it's true, is that it wasn't, like, for you, it sounds like you didn't necessarily take on or haven't had the stigma necessarily also in the back of your mind, where when you came to that understanding, it felt maybe like this, not only was it liberating, but then also like maybe this weight of like, having these stereotypes for you too. So I don't know, like, tell me your experience, because it sounds like you've just been very open to this idea for a long time, and it wasn't necessarily sort of like also shadowed with a lot of stigma. but maybe I'm wrong.
It's definitely been elements of like grief around it, I think, where I feel like, oh, I wish, like, oh, not maybe I wish, but of like, oh, things, allowing myself to realize how hard some things have been, if that makes sense. Like, it's almost
Yeah.
more permission giving, actually, to me.
See, I don't think I have felt a whole lot of heaviness or stigma with it. And I do think there's been quite a lot of openness to realizing and accepting that there's autism, there's ADHD, partly because it feels a bit like a data gathering exercise in that it's more information and more understanding, which I actually find very soothing to my brain. Um, I think also because of my training, and I knew a fair amount about autism and ADHD from like a nutrition perspective, and working with cases or witnessing that and talking about that and learning a little bit about it at uni. It wasn't like a major emphasis, but it's something I'd been around, so I understood. And I don't know if this was just unintentionally how it came about, but I didn't feel like it was this awful thing, if that makes sense, like something that's like, oh no. It was more like, oh, I already have a bit of information on this. And I also understood that there's lots that could really be helpful and supportive of that so I think that's why it hasn't felt like a heavy thing, or it's something I felt open to, because it's not felt um, overly disempowering as
You
a
know,
label.
and I love that because like that's the kind of experience I hope people have, you know. Like as
Mm.
you come into an
Yeah,
understanding of yourself as neurodivergent, that you're like, awesome, this is more information about myself, and I can see and I see how I can empower myself in these different ways, which we'll get into because I know you have thoughts about that too. So I just celebrate that because that is the
yeah.
experience I hope people have.
I know it's true. I hope my kids have. If it does turn out that it's a helpful diagnosis for them to get, I hope that it is. It's like, okay, cool. This is it's because I suppose for my brain, it's knowing, okay, these might be my strengths, and I have some information about what I might be really good at, and I have a bit more information about what I might struggle at. Okay, cool. What can I do with that?
Yeah.
It's very much how my brain works.
That is so cool. Well, okay, so you touched on how part of that information came from your training with nutrition, but so maybe we can talk about how you got onto this path of nutrition, holistic nutrition. So what led you here to this specifically?
Yeah, that's a great it's a great story. And the short version of it is my own health issues. So I've struggled with a lot of health issues since I was very young. I'm the youngest of four siblings, and I always joke that if anybody's ever watched or read Little Women, there's like Beth, the sickly one out of the four sisters, and then she like dies of the cold, and everyone's so robust, and she's like, I would always be like, I'm the best of my family. Is how I'm, because all my siblings were quite resilient and like, yeah, it's going for it. And I was always like, oh, I've got glandular fever. Oh, I've got a cold. Oh, I'm at the doctor. Oh, I'm at the pediatrician. Oh, I'm on antibiotics again. Oh, which now actually understanding the trauma I went through as a child makes so much sense from what we know from science and adverse childhood events and these kind of things. But anyway, so I had struggled with that a lot, and my undergraduate degree was actually in fine art. So I went to university to study art and worked as an artist. But I was kind of like in that early 20s, late teens, and I was just like, I don't want to keep living my life feeling this awful. And I was the typical case. I've been to the doctors, had lots of tests, told I was normal, everything came back fine. I was really the classic kind of falling in between the gaps of our conventional medical system. Like in some ways, I was so grateful I didn't have celiac disease or Crohn's disease or rheumatoid arthritis or some of these other more really serious things. Like on one hand, I was like, I should be really grateful I don't have that. But on the other hand, I'm still struggling. So I had loads of digestive issues, stomach pains, like issues with going to the toilet that were just like embarrassing. about having, like, I just couldn't poo like a normal person, and then that created loads of anxiety, and then I would have like that impact your confidence, and then socially, you're like structuring every social event around toilet planning, which is not what you want to do when you're like in your teenage years or early 20s. Like, let's go out to a club, and you're like, but is there a toilet I can use? It's like, I don't know, it just felt so old and tired and sore. And I was like, but I'm in my 20s. Like, this is like my time. This is the time I should look back on when I'm like 90 and be like, oh, remember when I used to go out dancing? And actually, but being like, oh no, I would have to cancel things because I was sore. And then I ended up with joint pain, and my periods were super weird. And then I got chronically fatigued. And it was just like lots of kind of little things that all mounted up. And so then I got to the point of just being like, well, I'm sick of everyone telling me I'm fine. I'm obviously not fine, but I'm not dying imminently, if that makes sense. Like,
Right.
that was the conclusion I got from conventional medicine, is you have no serious disease that you're going to die of right now. You have no disease that we can label. So in some ways you are kind of fine, which you can be grateful for, but my quality of life is massively impaired. And that was when I just sort of started down the health path. I think even thinking about food, I think I once had a doctor who once suggested, because I was diagnosed with IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, when I was like 15 or something. And I'm pretty sure a doctor then suggested, oh, maybe try cutting out dairy. And that was my like first ever realization of like, huh, food might make this stuff worse. And then, so I'd cut out dairy from a young age, and I'd kind of done little things. And then it was only really in my mid 20s that I also ironically did this diet called the GAPS diet. Have you ever heard of that? The gut and psychology syndrome diet? You might not have. And it's not necessarily something I highly recommend everyone to do. I think I probably wouldn't. I think it was helpful for me. But anyway, it's a diet that's often used with children, actually, with autism, similar to maybe like the specific carbohydrate diet, or different things like that. Anyway, which is really ironic looking back, because at the time I wasn't doing it because I was like, oh, I think this autism diet will help me. But anyway, so it's another funny thing that makes me laugh that I did. I'm like, oh, my body has known the whole time. It's just,
Mm.
I didn't, and then basically cut out like gluten and dairy. And anyway, so, and that helped some of my symptoms. And then the more I just researched, and to be honest, looking back, it just became my like hyper focus, and still is like that sort of like special kind of, I don't really like the phrase special interest, but it's the thing I'm interested in. I could spend hours learning, researching. And so I did that myself. And then I was like, whoa, I feel so much better now. Like, I can run again. My periods are boring, and I have a normal poo, and everything's quite boring, actually. This is great. I love boring. I love boring.
Right after all of those years, you're like, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just like, boring periods, boring poo, kind of boring, steady energy levels, boring mental health. I'm like, yes, this is great. So, and that's when I started off health coaching actually with people, so more on the coaching behavioral side of things. And then I was like, oh no, this needs to be geekier for me. I want to do labs and go into more of the functional medicine side of things. So then I went back to uni and did a postgrad in nutritional science and practice, which was really great. And that was now, I think I finished my postgrad about 8 years ago, 8 years ago. And then I've just been working with people ever since. And I kind of really still have a strong interest in gut health, because I just think the microbiome is fascinating, hormonal health, and then more in the last couple of years, like brain health. And I also currently, so I've been working for myself and doing nutrition stuff for a while. And then the last 2 years, I've also been working with a mental health charity that's all around nutrition and mental health, which has been really fun as well, because it's a research charity. So I get to be, I'm not an academic in how I don't like people telling me what to do, so I struggle in academia. And I'm also really dyslexic and don't like rules. But I really like research. So it's a perfect place for me to be, where I'm like research adjacent without actually having to do like follow all these stupid, what I feel like are unnecessary rules, which I don't like.
I love that. You're like right there. You can access it all without having to be inside the system.
Yes, which I don't necessarily, and it might be different now being in an educational system, knowing, okay, knowing this about myself, because it was only in my postgrad that I even realized or got diagnosed as dyslexic, because I had a lecturer that was like, your essays make no sense, but I know you know this. Like she was like, you shouldn't be failing this, but you are. And it was also that same lecturer that's like, oh, so this does put you on the spectrum, as it were, 'cause dyslexic. And I was like, what? And she was like, yeah. And that was my first understanding. I was like, oh. So that was actually also a part in realizing of like, oh, I'm actually really dyslexic. Okay, right, that makes. Which, to be fair, I went to art school as my undergrad, so like I feel like all of us are dyslexic and probably neurodivergent in my fine art class in the best possible way because we're all just like, I am what I am. Who cares? You know? And it was look, in hindsight, anyway, you can look back and be like, oh, that was a great place for me to be.
Yeah, it's so interesting, like how, to me at least, like how the neurodivergent brain, because it like neurodivergent is such an umbrella term. It includes all the things, like all the things you mentioned, right? Autism, ADHD, CPTSD, dyslexia, a bunch of others as well. Not that you mentioned, but like under the umbrella. But yeah, so you touched on in this journey that you came from your own experience. You had a lot of struggle with your own body and like finding the rhythm and the support that you really needed. And so like let's also move into this sort of your understanding around like what really supports the neurodivergent body. Because I know you said that you learned like things that helped you to have more empowerment around what could be seen as like are really symptoms that make us struggle a lot with different things. And
Yeah.
so what do you see as like environment, like supporting our digestion, our brain, our mental health, different things that we can do that would really support us in thriving into our strengths?
Yes, I love that question because I do think there is a lot we can do when we understand our body and what it needs. I do think a lot of the more difficult, should we say, or unwanted symptoms that we may have as neurodivergent people, or to be fair, with any health thing you're struggling with, is often the body communicating a need to you, but it's just we've never been taught that language. It's like our body's talking Vietnamese to us, and I've never learned that language, so all I hear is noise instead of actually understanding the nuance and the beauty and the communication, the need that's being. So I kind of see it as my job in my own body and with people I work with is like, okay, it's like translation. What's your body saying? How much of that communication, how many of those needs can we address? Because sometimes you can't address all of them, and there needs to be a deep acceptance and love and compassion for just who we are. We're not things to be fixed. We're people to be supported, and I
Yes.
think it's important to remember that difference, especially in my world. My little problem-solving brain can be like, "Oh, let's fix this, and this." And I think there is things you can air quote fix in terms of biochemistry. Like if you're low in B12, you can increase your B12. If you're low in iron, you can get the right amount of iron. Like there is that very like data or like problem solving, but ultimately I think it's really important that we approach it with a lot of curiosity and a lot of compassion. Um, but saying all of that, or not that that's the opposite, but I think gut health is a big one. I think there's some really interesting research. Not that it's necessarily causative or like the reason people struggle, but it is a very strong pattern. There's some great research, mainly in kind of a pediatric gastroenterologist called, I think he's a gastroenterologist, Dr. Alessio Fasano. He's actually based in Harvard, I think, and he does a lot of research in terms of children and gut issues, and there's a really big pattern of specific biomarkers to do with inflammation in the gut in children with autism specifically. So that's his like specific area of research. But there's a lot of other things out there, and generally there is a bit of a pattern around got issues, not with every single neurodivergent person, but I think a lot of the time it can come up, whether it's bowel stuff, bloating, gut infections, those kind of things. So I think if that is something you do have symptoms around, it can be really worth targeting that. And I think sometimes people are like, yeah, but what on earth has that got to do with my shutdowns and meltdowns? Like, what? Like, how is my bloating impacting that? But it really does in terms of the gut-brain axis, in terms of neurotransmitters, in terms of if you think about, or if I'll speak from my own experience. So I have 3 young children, and so my sensory overload it can be a lot, and I'm still trying to figure it out. So that can sometimes be stressful, a stressful input into my brain in terms of data input. If I also have this continuous stressful input from my gut to my brain because of bacterial overgrowth, fungal overgrowth, inflammation, dysbiosis, then my, let's just say, stress bucket, what I can tolerate is already not in my favor, like before I get
Right.
any external inputs, because my internal environment is already filling up my sensory bucket, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
or
So
not
taking a
sensory
lot of
bucket.
capacity, maybe.
Yes,
Like
so
it's,
much capacity.
yeah.
Yeah, same with hormones. So if you have, especially if you're got to have more female hormone profile, and you have that cycle, and that's not being impaired by any medications or whatever else, you kind of have that natural cycle. That again, if you're getting really sharp edges, if that makes sense, in terms of excess production or really low production, or you're going up and down, like you're on some like mental roller coaster that you never consented to, that also is going to like massively decrease your capacity, because just being in your body is taxing in terms of the input, in terms of the data input, the messages that you're getting. So the more you can reduce, if we say very generally, the inflammation or the stressful data inputs internally, the more capacity you have for these external stresses, which we know are going to be there. But it's just my kids are just being kids when they shout, when they scream, when they touch me, when they all talk at once, when they all decide. My son just got a harmonica the other day, and so like this morning I wake up to like him. He's 6 years old, so he's not playing it expertly. He's having fun with it, but I'm just like, it's not a positive deposit into my into my like my brain. It's a bit like, well, where are my noise cancelling headphones or my like ear defenders? And so I think about it that way. Like there's some external stresses we really can't necessarily control. Some obviously we can, but what we can have influence over is how our gut is working, how balanced our hormones are, or the levels of inflammation we have on our bodies. And that always has felt to me very empowering, because I've always felt like, oh, that like say you've got microbiome, you have a really fast cellular turnover rate in your gut, so the actual ecosystem of your gut can change quite quickly. And so it is something that can change. Or with your hormones, they can change. Like all of these things we have a lot more healing potential in our bodies than we realize. And the more resiliency you can create biochemically, I feel like the more resiliency you create for the external chaos sometimes. So I
Yeah,
do think this gut
actually.
health is a big one, your hormones. And then also I think what doesn't get talked about a lot is just like making sure our brains, your brain is a really important organ, and it uses up a lot of energy, like about 20% of our overall ATP production goes to our good old brain doing its thing. But it requires a lot of nourishment. And we think about vitamins and minerals sometimes a bit like, oh yeah, like I'll take my multivitamin. That's a good idea. Like it's this optional thing that's helpful to do. Whereas actually most vitamins and minerals are essential. There's not it's a nice to have, a bonus. Vitamin B12 is a bonus vitamin. It's not. It's essential for creating neurons in your brain, getting the right fats into your bloodstream is essential for creating hormones and brain cells, or for reducing inflammation. So I think sometimes we just forget a bit about our brains. about nourishing them. And I've dived into this, as you can imagine, even more so with having kids, because I'm like geeking away at like, oh, their brain is rapidly growing and developing, right? The amount of brain, a baby's brain size, it like gets huge in a very short space of time. So I've been thinking, how do I most nourish this rapid growth of this organ that's key for their development, and looking at how do we make a brain. And I think, but we forget that a bit as adults. We think about it with kids. But I think, especially as a neurodivergent person, especially knowing my own health history, I've become more aware the last 5 years of like, oh, I need to just make sure like my brain is really well resourced with the practical ingredients that it needs. Like, and so for listening, things like some of the basic things that your brain really needs are really healthy fats. So like your omega-3 fats, and generally healthy fats in general, like whole food healthy fats. Your brain is primarily made out of fat, so it really needs a good amount of healthy fats. Same with hormones, actually. Hormones are made out of fat, so really healthy fats.
Like avocados and walnuts and things.
Avocado, yeah, fish.
Or fish.
If you eat fish,
Yeah.
fish is the brain loves fish. So if you want to think about one food to help your brain and you eat fish, fish is great, like salmon, mackerel, anchovies, those kinds of things. But also like linseeds, walnuts, avocado, eggs, good quality meat if you eat meat. I eat meat. Most people assume I'm vegan. I'm not. It's I always have to like interrupt people before they're like, Kezia will have the vegan. I'm like, no. I eat various things. So really those kind of nuts, dairy, if you tolerate dairy, really great for the brain. And then also you have like your like B vitamins as well. So like things like B12, which I feel like a lot of people know about, but there's also other B vitamins as well that come into play that you mainly find in things like vegetables, meat, fruit, fish, like, and then obviously you can supplement with them as well, but you really want to get the food, and it doesn't need to be overly complicated, but I think sometimes we just need to remember or even ask the question, how well am I nourishing my brain? Like I think about I want to give my brain like an abundance of resources, because there's already a lot of things. How I view my brain is that it has to work a little bit harder, I've learned, to deal with certain aspects of life, with whether that's through hypervigilance and trauma, through just developmental issues because of having trauma at a young age, through wading through a neurotypical world. It's actually quite draining. Things are quite hard. I don't get certain things. So and I can't control all of that. Like I can't, at the moment, the thing that I'm struggling with the most is discovering the blueprint of like having children in schools and all of these social interactions that I literally have no blueprint for, and they stress the life out of me because I'm like, there's all these unwritten rules for like school, and anyway, it's just bizarre.
Like as the parent having to interact
as the
with
parent, it's like,
Yeah.
there's all these new social situations that I just don't really do. And that is just like taking my girls to like a dance class, for example. Turns out there's like this whole unwritten rule book. Yeah, making sure my brain has like a good, like I think about it being presented each day with a good buffet of resources so that it can take what it needs and not have added stress to it because it's lacking in something. And so for me, it feels like an easy win. I'm like, oh, that's an easy problem I can solve, if that makes sense. There's other problems in life being a neurodivergent person that aren't as easy to solve. But making sure I get enough iron, B12, and vitamin D feels like an easy win to me. So it's logical that I do that. That's kind of how my brain thinks about it.
You know, I really love that because it approaches sort of like life and supporting yourself from an empowering stance and also an acceptance stance. So acceptance being like, there are elements that are outside my control, you know, like all the things you mentioned. And then there are also elements I can accept that like there are more under my control and are things I can really engage with. That's almost like an act of self-care. And like you're saying, resourcing, you're really giving yourself the elements that will help you engage with the elements, the part that is outside your control. And that can be extra taxing on our brains and our nervous system. So, so that's like from the coaching side, because like that's some of the nutritionist expertise, right? As a coach too, if someone were to say, you know, like yes, I have all that in my mind, but I'm still having a hard time putting it into practice. Where would you have somebody start if maybe like their safe foods or their things are maybe less nutritionally beneficial, and to move in that direction?
Yes. Yeah, I think you've got to start with where you're at. So the first thing I'd make sure somebody was clear on, or that we were clear on, is that, okay, what are the main players here? So, or said another way, what are the key root causes or the key irritants or areas of imbalance or inflammation? And so I think the biggest thing that stops people biggest thing that stops me is I get really overwhelmed. It's not that I lack information sometimes, it's that I get overwhelmed with the information and I'm struggling to know what to prioritize because I feel like everything's important. And I
Exactly.
think what I basically try and do and have become good at in terms of health, and then I'm not so good at this in other areas of my life. But anyway, play to our strengths, manage our things that are not so strong. But if you can get really, so for me, I got really clear. Some of my big root causes was my gut issues going on. So that was creating a lot of inflammation and a lot of stress and adding to my anxiety because I was worrying about the toilet and I was bloated and I was and I had this constant sensory discomfort that was just like, oh, horrible. So for me, when I understanding that and shifting that, actually, there was loads of other stuff still going on, but because I could prioritize that strategically, then that essentially I just focused on that for a good couple of months and did a couple of things targeting. I ran some different labs and tested my gut microbiome, but you don't necessarily need to run tests. But understanding what are your unique root causes, and it might not be gut health, it might be someone I was working with recently had loads of stuff going on, neurodivergent, chronic fatigue, just loads of things. But I was like, okay, that's the first thing we should work on with you is let's get your sleep better because your sleep's actually awful. So the most productive, strategic, evidence-based thing for us to do for you is to make sure you improve your quality of sleep because they're actually getting a decent amount of hours, but their quality was very poor. So, and we needed to work on it, her gut health, hormone health. There was lots of stuff to do. She had thyroid disease, all this stuff. But I was like, actually, let's prioritize sleep because if your sleep is better, the compounding, the cascading effect is going to be huge on everything else in your life. So I think especially if you're struggling, if you're overwhelmed or if you're tired or there's health issues or your time, resource, money poor, if you can understand what's the one thing that is going to give me the biggest bang for my buck, biggest ROI, whatever, I don't really like any of those phrases, but what's going to make all very masculine.
The biggest shift.
Biggest shift. There we go. Thank you. That's nicer. Then and focusing on that and prioritizing that can be really helpful. And that's what I tend to do for myself and people I work with.
I absolutely love that because you're not trying to tackle everything at once, even when our brain is telling us that, because we do feel overwhelmed. We can have a hard time prioritizing things. So everything feels like they are talking to us at one time and I should just tackle everything. But I love what you're saying is, you discovering that one thing that sort of it releases the capacity to be able to then address other things. Because if I'm like physically taxed by inflammation and bad sleep and all the things, like it can be hard mentally to go and then figure out recipes and to follow them and to make sure when I'm at the store to have my list because I probably forgot it, and then what was that thing I needed? And so but if I don't have to necessarily start there, but I know I will eventually get to the nutrition piece. But maybe starting with sleep actually helps give the capacity to even address other things. That makes so much sense, and it might not be, and like you're saying, it's going to be different for different people. But, just kind of getting curious for yourself you know, and maybe even just like starting at any one thing
Yeah.
if you don't have access to a coach, but like, you know, just picking one of the core things would be like nutrition, sleep, other aspects.
Yeah. It's huge. And I would
Yeah,
say with that, it's like if you're like, well, I don't know where to begin, you cannot go wrong with improving your sleep, with adding more, for want of a better phrase, mindfulness activities, things that help to get your body in a parasympathetic nervous state. And you can't go wrong with adding in decent foods you already know are good for you. You don't need me to tell you. You probably already know that, an avocado is good and like fizzy drinks are not as good. But actually focusing on adding in rather than removing, add in, add in, add in. You could just, even if you have no information, you have no capacity to like sort out the data and categorize and prioritize, you just made your sleep better. Man, your body would, it's so productive. It's such a strategic thing to do.
yeah, yes. Maybe just briefly, would you touch on what supports the best sleep? You know, like I know everybody says turn off your phone an hour before. We may or may not be doing that, but but I noticed for me, once I really started prioritizing shutting off lights, you know, because I didn't think I realized how big of an impact it was to sleep with like lights on or something like that. That helped a lot. Also, um, what was it? It was, it might sound strange, but it was kind of like positioning of how I was positioned related to the window, so I would get natural light in the
Yeah,
morning.
yeah.
Actually helped me a lot because I would wake up more naturally, and like somehow I was sort of finding a rhythm that actually fit with our actual days and, you know, the sun and all that. So for me that helped. But like, what would you say in regard to some things we can do to really support sleep?
Yeah, there's lots you can do. And I do think I love sleep. It's something
Yeah.
I think we don't we just forget about sometimes. Like we think it's like, whereas actually it's really foundational. So what you said about light, I really agree with, and the research is really clear on, the more blue light you have, the more you're going to squash or reduce your melatonin production. So to get a good quality night's sleep, you want good levels of melatonin as well as other things going on. But as soon as you have screens or even just normal bulbs, like household bulbs, spotlight, Kindles, even with backlights, phones, TVs, these kind of things. So minimizing that can be really helpful. Now, I do have my phone before bed because I currently my Kindle broke, so I read my books on my phone, or I might watch Netflix on some like. So, in an ideal world, you put all your screens away and lock them in a box. 7 but I mean, I don't do that. But what I do is I make sure I have software to filter out. So, um,
Yes. The blue
I use
light.
app. Yeah, so I have Apple products, so that most new Apple products have that built in, but there's also other software you can do. I use like Flux you can put on your computer. I pay for a software I think called Iris, so I have that on my computer all day because I work at a computer most of the time. I also have blue light blocking glasses, so if I'm watching a film, um, I'll do that, or if I'm reading a book on my phone, I'll put those on. And I do tend to find them to actually be really, I find them really helpful, but they can make a big difference. Even if you just wear them 15 minutes, 20 minutes before bed, if you read a book, or again, they are quite a sensory experience because they change, everything becomes a bit orange. So
Yeah.
it might not be for everybody. I find it quite soothing actually because I'm sensitive to light anyway, and things light can be a bit jarring. So that can
Yeah.
make a difference. Even just like brushing your teeth, like if you're like thinking low level lighting, especially in wintertime, lamps, candles, not just going into the bathroom and putting on all your really bright spotlights, just
Good
like
point. Yeah.
low, like even when I had little kids and so you're up in the night feeding, I'd always make sure for their benefit as well as mine, I had blue light blocking glasses on, lights were low, most of the time didn't always work with poo explosions, but whatever. Um, Keeping that sort of low light can be helpful, and then sleeping in like a cave, essentially, as much as possible. So research has shown even if you're getting a little bit of blue light onto your skin, not even through your eyeballs is so light is a message. It's a communication to the brain. That is essentially what it is. It's telling the brain stuff constantly. So that's why we want to be strategic about the input. It's another data input into the brain. So for sleep, we want to be strategic about it, but you still get data input through the skin. So making sure you don't have like a digital blue light alarm clock or standby lights, or I have a street lamp right outside my bedroom window. So I have like tons of blackout curtains to dim that. Otherwise, even if I'm sleeping with an eye mask on, which I do because I like that, it's still gonna reduce my melatonin production. So I think that can be really helpful. And ideally, also, it's very boring, but going to bed and waking up at the same time, generally speaking, does wonders for your circadian rhythm. It's a bit boring. And also not eating before bed. This isn't, I'd say 80% of the time, this helps most people. Some people do need to eat something before bed. But for me, especially, I will sleep much poorer if I eat a big meal and then go straight to bed.
Right, because your body's trying to do something while
Yeah,
you're trying to
it's
sleep.
digesting. And digestion is a really energy consuming process. It takes it's like, I know it's similar to the brain, 25% of your energy goes on digesting, whereas actually we want all that energy for sleep quality. So for me, especially, I don't, if I eat right before bed, it's not great. Same with alcohol. Alcohol's terrible for sleep, but most
How
people know that.
interesting. Yeah, well, how interesting though to think about the light on your skin. You know, just like how much you could really impact your sleep experience in ways I don't think we often think about. You know, we're
No,
always
and just
thinking light in the eyes, and you're like your whole body's sensing things.
yeah, I think about that with nature. I wonder if why, all the research on being out in nature is so good for you. And like we feel that because of light through our eyes, but I wonder how much is like the light on our skin and we're breathing in, if you're walking in a forest, you're breathing in a different microbiome through the air, through your nostrils, like it's all of these sensory factors that are beneficial. I find that fascinating.
I know, I can hear that. I love hearing your passion because like, especially as this is something that you're very, very interested in, right? Like so then you have all these like really interesting details. Okay. So I do want to touch on, I know we're coming toward the end of our conversation, not quite at the very edge. But so we've talked about your expertise, but I also want to talk about your experience as an entrepreneur. Because that's one of the things too that we like to emphasize on this podcast. And so being someone who's neurodivergent, going into business for yourself, opening up your own practice, like what has that been like for you? What has been challenging about it? What have you found that has been really helpful as you've explored this entrepreneurial journey? Yeah.
That's a good question. I would say it has been both. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is like I couldn't imagine doing anything else. Like I feel like I'd be relatively unemployable, generally speaking. And I think a lot of the because I do recognize some of how I live with my neurodivergency in my brain is kind of a privilege of the environment I've been able to create, if that makes sense, for myself. And there's a lot of privilege and things involved in that. And I really don't think I would be as well in the typical office, fluorescent light times, full-time hours, this times of day, that inflexible model. I feel like I would really wither in that
Yeah.
environment. And so I feel like now I'm not sure what else, unless I was like literally the boss of a company and then could just decide
Right.
whatever I wanted to do. But essentially, when you're an entrepreneur, that's what you are. So you're the boss. So, and then the other half has been really challenging as well. I think working for yourself and setting up your own thing has been, like if 10 years ago or whatever, someone was like, this is going to be like create so much, it's going to force you to do so much personal therapeutic mindset work. I would have been like, what are you on about? I just want to work for myself. This is just a job. But actually, I think the entrepreneur for me has really, to be honest, facilitated, it prods at a lot of the weak areas. Not weak areas. It's like a trigger, can be, because it brings
Yeah.
up thoughts about scarcity, beliefs about yourself, beliefs about visibility. It's really vulnerable, I think, and I don't think it's talked about a lot or enough. Is the entrepreneurial journey is incredibly vulnerable. Essentially, what I do in my business is say, hey, I am good at this. You should pay me to do this. It's a worthwhile investment. and I'm going to be visible. I'm going to say this. I'm going to market myself. I'm going to be vulnerable and say, hey, this is what I'm doing to some extent, and leave that with you. That, like, oh, that's very uncomfortable to begin with.
Yeah.
And it can bring up a lot of deeper issues that actually have nothing to do with you being an entrepreneur or your business. I think what I've learned is I need to constantly ask myself questions about what does the business need or my work need, and what do I need? Because they are separate. And I think for me, a big part of my learning has been untangling my work from my identity, and my business from, and looking at, okay, why is the money side of this really stressing me out? What's really driving that? It's actually nothing to do with business. It's actually to do with this stuff that happened however many years ago. Like that
Yeah.
untangling, I think it's forced me, or been a vehicle for me anyway, to do a lot of untangling where I would merge things and put a lot and blame entrepreneurialism for a lot of things that it actually isn't responsible for, like overworking, stress, financial. I mean, there is financial just repercussions, but the stress, that the scarcity, and actually to be able to separate them out has been a big part of the process, and definitely one of the harder parts of it. But overall, like it's something that I feel very lucky to be able to do, and proud that I've stuck it out this long, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because there's been many times where I'm like, I should just go and, I don't know, get a normal job, or just like work full time in the home as a mom. Like, but I think that I always come back to, I don't have to do this. This is a choice, and I am really. I think I've made basically my own business out of my interest, out of my hyper focus. So I
Right.
don't ever really lose motivation for that, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
It's like intrinsically
Because
motivating.
yeah, and actually I get more frustrated. Like I get excited for my Monday mornings, where I'm like, oh, like this morning I was going through a client's genetic test and looking at like their dopamine and GABA and serotonin genes, and so how that affects their life and their more addictive behaviors, and like I just think that's so fun. So there's a lot
I
of
love that.
like natural energy, because what I've realized is I've essentially made a career out of this like total hyper focus that I have. And it does mean other things in life just get less focused.
Yeah. No, but
But
there's
that's okay.
actually, I feel like people have talked about how, like, especially for autistic folks, being able to do and engage with the thing that you're hyper focused on is actually very nurturing for your nervous system. So
Yeah.
it's not just this thing that's a part of our brain, and that some people are like, why can't you just switch focus? But it's like actually really deeply connected to thriving and your well-being to be able to
Yes.
do that. And so I love that you've been able to craft this, and that you're able to bring that to all these people that you serve, right? So it's not just like a solo endeavor of, I'm just going to sit here and research, but that's the beauty of entrepreneurship, is that you are bringing this thing to the world, or like to your community, and who might benefit from it. And so I really
Yes.
love that. Thank you
Yeah,
so
I
much
love that
too.
too.
Yeah.
It's a really
Yeah.
beautiful, like it's the
Right.
being able to serve and impact and feel like, because I have, as I don't know, many people probably listening do, kind of social justice and creating change has always been a really key part of since I was a child, like, and jobs that I've had in care or with unhoused people or addicts, or all of these kind of things in my career history, um, and actually, and then getting very overwhelmed by that in terms of, oh my goodness, this what what
Such huge.
so much
Right.
that needs to
Yeah.
change, like literally. And it's such a empathetic person that I can't watch the news. I can't function and feel. There's just a lot of feelings that could go on. I've learned to really regulate and manage them, and actually coming to the conclusion of, okay, I can't change everything in the world, but I can create ripple effects. And maybe the best thing is to be as well as I can be, so that I can then serve and create change one person at a time, or have capacity to do to do things that help shift things a little bit, like play
Yeah.
my part so that the world is left a better place. And then I think about the ripple effect. If I'm well and then I help other people become well and that impacts their family, you do just create this ripple effect, ripple effect, ripple effect, which feels more empowering than just getting sucked into all the negative, hopeless emotion around all the awful stuff that is the reality of the world. And actually being like, okay, well, I'm going to help. Is that kind of laser focus again of like, well, I can help you. So let's do that and do that well. And then I can help you and just slowly, because for a long time I did really struggle with, I want to change the world and how do we end homelessness? And what about poverty? And what about everything happening abroad, but also what's happening 3 miles down the road? The poverty here in Scotland, the injustices here in the, like, not far from me, plus the injustices, like, literally on the, like, in millions of other countries. It just felt so heavy and so overwhelming and really difficult to navigate through as a sensitive person without shutting off to it and like sticking your hands in your ears and being like, la 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 la, I'm fine. And trying to find a way that I work that I could feel like I'm making some impact without it being at a cost, without martyring myself and that we're so used to doing has it took me a long time to figure out how to that. But I feel like I'm still learning about it, but I do feel like I'm in a nice place now of like, okay, I'm ticking that impact box
I
and
got my.
justice without burning out constantly myself.
What I really love is I've heard it throughout what you've shared today, where there's sort of this thread of you having this particular skill and like finding the thing to focus on. Like, for instance, like when it comes to our neurodivergent experience and how it's connected to our digestion and our sleep and all these things related to our body as well as our brain, that you're like, okay, so like that can be really overwhelming. What's like the one thing I can start with? And then similarly, even in this realm of like entrepreneurship, impact in the world, again, it's sort of that beautiful ability to look at everything, acknowledge it's very overwhelming, and then begin to focus in on like, what is the thing I can actually impact? So I just wanted to reflect that back. It's been really cool to hear you say that in like a lot of different ways. Just being able to like, wow, okay. And because of that, it's kind of coming from this empowering stance, right? Like the things that are overwhelming that feel really disempowering, but to then engage and like step into something empowering is like focusing in on what can I actually do. You know?
That is a really helpful reflection because I think I'm still realizing that in terms of I think it's only recently I've realized, oh, that is this strength in terms of taking disempowering situations and going and accepting that I can't do everything actually, which is sometimes frustrating, and I have feelings about
Yeah.
that. But
Right.
I would like to control everything, really, But actually being like, okay, but I can't, but I can do something, and actually let's prioritize that. And I think that is something I'm good at. It's like, okay, what do we prioritize in this? So I think that is the challenge of this age we're in, this information rich, this data rich age, where you can research as much as you like, learn as much, keep up to date as much as you like, but that's only empowering if we learn what to do with it.
Right. Right. Very true. Otherwise, it might just stop you. Because, what's interesting, I think, too, what I'm kind of sensing is, and I'm putting words to it now, is a sense around getting stuck in like a black and white. And the thing is, like, I think, like, at least for the side of me that's autistic, like black and white thinking can be something I get into, but I have also learned how to sort of navigate or like notice when that's happening. So like either I solve the whole world's problems or I do nothing, right? Black and white.
Yeah.
And then move into more of a nuanced understanding of like, cool, that's how I feel, and that's totally valid because it is really overwhelming. And like what is real is that I can do something, and it's going to be smaller, but it still means it's still valuable, it's still meaningful. So
Yeah.
um, yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for. Oh, I also wanted to touch on that part around how you said that your entrepreneurial journey really highlighted for you like just the personal transformation that goes into this, and just, I just really like love that so much because I think that's maybe an unconscious thing that we'll experience, but to really put words to that was powerful. As I heard you say that, I was like, yes, actually, that makes a lot of sense. There are things that are a part of my business, and then there's things that are part of myself. So like being able to maybe suss apart like what really is going on here. Is it just that, I have this fear around being seen for this, or is it like, oh, like I can explore in my nervous system what it's like to be seen in general, or, what it is I'm afraid of will happen, or even like you were saying, like past traumas and things like that. Like it can be a rich, and even in and of itself, sometimes an overwhelming experience to face like the inner work that goes along with entrepreneurship. But I love that like you just kind of took that as the opportunity that it is and engaged with it from that place of letting it be a transformative experience.
Yes, and also letting it be in its right placing in your life. I think I've noticed a lot I do a lot of my, I do everything online, so online marketing, content marketing, these kinds of things. And I feel like there is, in that space anyway, there's a lot of what I witness of people like trying to fulfill their lives through their Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, their marketing of like, this needs to be, my brand needs to be this authentic representation of everything that I am. And I'm like, that's a lot of weight to put on your business. Like, that's a lot of weight to put on social media. You're asking an awful lot out of that. And I think that for me, witnessing that and being cognizant of that, of being like, I want to be real, and I hope that what you see online is what you see when you meet me in person. That there's a congruency there. It's important. But I'm also not looking for my entrepreneurial journey to be this ultimate fulfillment of my life. It's a part of it, and it's a beautiful part. It's a privileged part. It's something I choose to do because I get to do it. But it's not, and I see that an awful lot where it's like I need it's almost like people just ask so much of their business, and I think it's been really helpful for me to understand. Okay, I'm just going to put it in this, not even in a box, but this is the role it plays in my life. This is the boundaries that I have with it. And I don't need to process every emotional thought on the internet. I don't need to tell people every single thing about my life. I don't, you know, but I can be honest. I can show up with radical authenticity. And often I am a bit TMI. I do give too much information because I feel like I don't really care on some things. But there's some things I don't talk about at all. And that's also fine. So I think that's been really helpful for me of just not feeling like entrepreneurialism needs to be the be all and end all. And it's been really good for me to also make sure like, I have some other hobbies that I don't talk about on the internet, and
Yeah.
these like just
I really appreciate you mentioning that too. That sense of like knowing what the role is of this business, because sometimes it can feel like that when you look at other people's brands and things. Maybe if you're at the beginning of your entrepreneurial journey, you're like, okay, I got to put my all into this, and that in and of itself can be overwhelming to the point of maybe not even beginning. And so I love what you're saying, that it has a role and it can be what you want it to be. But it doesn't have to be everything, and you don't have to put like everything out there online, which can be that part that feels too vulnerable, because maybe it is.
Yeah.
Like maybe you don't need to put everything out there. And so yeah, I just, as you were saying that, in my mind it was sort of like helping me see it as this like smaller, more attainable thing. In and of itself, entrepreneurship is going to be a big endeavor, but like you're saying, it has a role, and in one sense it kind of breaks it down into this more attainable thing. Was what I was kind of getting. So
Yeah,
I love that.
because the principles of business, for want of a better phrase, are relatively simple. That it's like there's some exchange that happens for a service or a product. There's different variations of that. And then you want to keep having those exchanges. If you want to make more money, you have more of those exchanges, or you increase the money that you exchange. Essentially, that's the ecosystem you're trying to create. So in some ways, and I'm not saying it is just all super easy, but that's the strategy. I think what can make it feel really overwhelming is all the other pressure we put on it to perform for us, for our identity, for our visibility, for feeling known, for feeling authentic. For if we add a lot of other pressure for it to fulfill other needs, and we're not getting those needs met elsewhere, if you're not feeling seen and witnessed and valued and held elsewhere, it's just gonna be an awful lot of overwhelming pressure on this kind of little ecosystem that you're creating. And I've learned that because I've done that. I've been like, I'm gonna have all my needs fulfilled by this business, and then been like, oh, that doesn't work. Okay.
Yeah, but and you found what did work,
Yes.
and thank you for that honesty there too around like, I know this because I did I've tried all the things that didn't work.
Yeah, like trying to find inner peace through an entrepreneurial journey doesn't work.
Right,
I've tried it. It's just trying to find safety literally you'll get the
right,
opposite because it's a
right,
very
right.
unsafe experience because you can't control customers, which is very annoying. I
Mm,
can't control clients, which is
yeah.
good because that would be a very bad dynamic. But there's a, there's so for me actually realizing I need to feel safe, period. And then I
Hmm.
can do whatever I want work-wise, entrepreneurial-wise. I need to learn how to cultivate my own regulation of my nervous system, my own peace, whatever you want to call that, separate, and bring that goodness into my entrepreneurial. I'm not going to get it from that, or if I do, it's a fleeting, it's a poor quality sub, it's a poor substitute because you
Right.
have to keep building, keep growing, keep being popular, keep getting followers, keep getting customers, keep getting money, keep up, which is very exhausting. And I think that's partly why there's so much burnout pivoting. And sometimes you see business owners where they literally have like a new brand every 2 months, and you're like, what? I feel, oh, what's like, you can witness that because I think there's other stuff,
You
other stuff
know,
going on.
it makes me think too, like, so maybe not even just for the new entrepreneurs, but maybe folks who have been doing it for a while and they are hitting burnout. That might be an interesting thing to explore of like, hey, what am I putting into this business or think I'm getting out of it that doesn't have to be here, that I can be sort of supporting and empowering myself to have in other ways that would actually support the business and not doing it in a way that's going to burn me out. That's, yeah, I feel like that could be a whole discussion unto itself, but I know we're
Yeah, no,
coming
it
towards the
could.
end.
Yeah, it could. And I love entrepreneurial chat. I just find it so fascinating because it's this cross section of your relationship with money, your visibility, your vulnerability, your gifts, your service, your creativity, it's like this, like all of these things converge. And it's this beautiful, and it can be so creative, and you are just creating this brand new thing, and it's such a privilege. I always sometimes think it's mad that anyone would pay me to do anything. Like that's such a gift in a way. Like
Yeah,
so, I think there's a lot that I love the entrepreneurial conversation for that. There's a lot of richness and a lot of things in it.
beautiful. Oh, well, maybe sometime I'll have you back on just like specifically talk about this, but, but, so we're coming to the end of our time here and I want to respect that. And where can people find you? What things can they engage with, especially around like the holistic nutrition and the coaching that you offer?
Yeah, so you can find even if you just Google Kezia Hall, there's not very many Kezia Halls on the internet, which is handy. So win for neutral first names. Um, and or keziahall.com is my website. And so I have a podcast on there that I've done for a long time. You can also find me on YouTube. That's a new thing I just started doing videos, which is edits, which is fun. So there's a lot of free stuff that you could tune into. The podcast is called The Gut Goddess Show. That's got over 300 episodes and is a great resource there. And the YouTube channel is Kezia Hall Eats. But if you just put in Kezia Hall, you can see it there. And if you're interested in work with me, that's all on my website. You can have a look there. And honestly, if you're wanting support or you think what we've talked about resonates, then I'm very happy to chat with people and just I really like talking with people and finding out what's going on with them, what they're struggling with. And I don't pressure people into anything. That's really not my vibe. So
Yeah.
if you are thinking, I would like some support, and I do have the resources for that, because obviously that is a part of the conversation, then happy to chat, even if I just refer you somewhere else. I'd be like, no, you should really do this. This would be helpful. Or because I am good at that strategizing and prioritizing of like, hey, you really think you need nutrition support, but I think the support you actually need is this. And so go do that first.
I love that. Well, thank you so much. And I had a thought, but I forgot what it was. Thank you so much for being here, and I'm excited. Oh, that's what it was. I love that you said that there are many ways to connect with you, right? So, like, you have the free resources. You said 300 episodes. I'm sure that's a lot of information for people to explore, and that's just
A
free
lot
and
of me
available.
talking.
What I find interesting. So, and then other ways too. So thank you for your work in the world. Thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for being on this podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. I have loved our conversation.